Be seated. Okay, then. Julian?
Yes, Your Honor, we'll be calling Nina actually, Rivera Keene. She's in the hall and I can go get her. Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Rivera Keene. Is that a hyphenated last name?
It is.
Okay. Did we subpoena you to be here in court to testify in this case?
Yes.
Did you at one time work at the Nashville Marriott?
Yes, I did.
And the time frame where you worked at the Nashville Marriott was 2005 to 2010, correct?
Correct.
When you first started with the Marriott in 2005, did you start as a front desk agent?
Yes.
Now, a front desk agent works at the front desk, checking people in, checking people out, answering questions appropriate to the reservation, and so forth, correct?
Correct.
And one of the things that you do at the front desk is you use the PMS system, the property management system at Nashville Marriott, correct?
Correct.
All right. After about a year and a half, after you started there in 2006, did you get promoted to the position of front desk supervisor?
Yes.
And so at that point, did you still perform the functions of a front desk agent, or did you begin to perform a different function at all?
Both. Had more duties as a supervisor.
Okay. But sometimes you would also fill in or work while you were a supervisor as an agent as well.
Correct.
All right. And that was still with the PMS system, am I right?
Yes.
Now, the PMS system would receive information about reservations from the Marriott call center, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware of someone named Takima Baker who testified in this case, and the ladies and gentlemen saw some of her testimony by videotape the other day, who worked at the Marriott call center?
I do not.
Okay. But what would happen as you were trained is that when information came in to the Marriott call center, that special requests would be transmitted to the PMS at the Marriott Nashville by the call center people, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, when we talk about special requests, correct me if I'm wrong, but included in that are something called A1 and C1, right?
Correct.
A1 is the code if somebody's requesting an adjoining room, correct?
Correct.
And C1 is the code if somebody's requesting a connecting room, right?
Yes.
All right, and so if somebody wants to request a choice of either one, either adjoining or connecting, then both of those codes would be put down, correct?
Yes.
And then if there was a connecting room, which is where you have two rooms side by side with a door between them where you can open it up and keep a family in two rooms, that would be a connecting room, and an A1, an adjoining room, would be where there was a room next door, correct?
Right.
And if somebody was requesting a connecting or an adjoining room, when you receive that information at the Nashville Marriott front desk PMS, it would necessarily have to include either the room number that they wanted to connect or adjoin to, or the name of the person that they wanted to connect or adjoin to, right?
Objection leading.
Overruled.
Essentially, yes. If the reservation was made through our call center, then it would be the name. If the guest checked in and said that someone was arriving later, then they would either say, you know, give them our room number or a name to connect to.
So let's sort of unpack that a little bit.
Sorry.
If the person comes right up to the desk and says, I want a connecting or adjoining room with room X that somebody that I want to be connected or adjoined to is in, then they're at the desk at the Nashville Marriott, they would be using potentially a room number, right? And possibly a name.
Essentially, yes.
Okay. But at the call center, they don't have the room numbers, right?
Correct.
At the call center, in order to do something that transmits information about a connecting or an adjoining room, they have to give the call center the name of the person they want to be connected or adjoined to, right?
Right.
And if you receive something from the call center that says, here's the reservation, connecting or adjoining room A1 or C1, and there was no name of who they want to be next to, that's not what you would expect, right?
Right.
Ordinarily, an A1, C1 code that comes into the PMS system from the call center ordinarily has the name of the person that this person wants to be connected or adjoined to, right?
Not always. Most of the time, when families are traveling together, then they would just do it at the desk, as well as business travelers.
Okay, but ordinarily,
Yes.
usually, if it comes from the call center, the A1, C1 code is going to have then something in the comment section that says the name of the person that they're seeking to be put next to.
Correct.
Now, when you first started, did you receive a training module at the Nashville Marriott that was a 90-day training period?
I can't remember if it was a 90-day training period, but there was training.
Well, you remember when your deposition was taken and you were put under oath?
Yes.
Have you read that deposition recently?
I did skim through it. I didn't read it in detail, no.
Okay, so if I were to tell you that you said it was 90 days, any reason to disagree with that?
No.
Okay. During that 90-day training period, you had no training in privacy policy, correct?
In the training, we're told not to give out any information. If someone called, they would have to have the first and last name. We can't give out room numbers, things of that nature.
Do you remember telling us that in that 90-day training module, when your deposition was taken, that there was no training regarding privacy policy?
As far as written documentation or the computer-based training?
All right, let's break that down.
Mhm.
In terms of any written policies or procedures, they gave you nothing about privacy policy for guests, right?
Correct.
Now, the writings that you did get, you did read, correct?
Correct.
And if the Nashville Marriott had given you a policy or procedure in writing about privacy of guests, you would have read it, correct?
Correct.
But during that period, they didn't give you that. Am I right?
Correct.
In fact, Windsor, that was managing the hotel, Windsor had a handbook that they gave you, correct?
I don't remember.
You have your deposition in front of you up there. We put it up there for you, I believe.
I don't.
Oh, you don't? Here, let me do this if I can approach Your Honor. There we go. Okay. Can you turn to page 50 to see if that refreshes your memory?
Okay.
Does that refresh your memory that you received a handbook from Windsor and that it did not talk at all about guest privacy?
Correct. It was just an employee handbook.
So did they give you a different handbook about privacy for guests?
Not that I recall, no.
Were you ever given any materials at all that dealt specifically with hotel guest privacy?
Not written, no.
Now you did say, started to say earlier, when I used that word unpack, which I think is a cool way of saying it, when we started to unpack that one paragraph you gave us, you said that you did receive some instruction not to give out room numbers or private information. Remember that?
Yes.
Those were oral instructions, correct?
Correct.
Verbally, you were told, don't give out people's room numbers, right?
Correct.
And you were told that because if you give out people's room numbers, then you may be giving it to someone who has, in your words, malicious intent, right?
Correct.
And you all talked about that when you give the key to somebody when they check in back then in 2008 and before, that you don't want to tell them their room number because somebody next to them might hear that might have malicious intent, right?
Correct.
I mean, the way it worked was the only people that should know where a guest is going to be is the guest and the hotel, right?
Correct.
And if the guest chooses to tell a friend, say Chris Fowler, who works with them at ESPN, what room she's in, that's her choice to give that information to Chris Fowler, right?
Correct.
Or if it's Jesse Palmer, who's down the hall, that's also part of the broadcast team, it would be her choice to tell Jesse Palmer what her room number is, correct?
Yes.
But other than that, the only people that are supposed to know where she is in the hotel is her and the hotel, right?
Correct.
In fact, one of the things you all talked about was that when somebody comes to the hotel, goes into that room, hangs the do not disturb sign out there, closes the door, hits the deadbolt, does that neat little latch that you slide around like this so that the door will only open a little way. But once they get in there, they should feel as safe and secure as if it was their home away from home, right?
Yes.
So, you weren't supposed to give out the room number. You weren't supposed to give out personal information to people like a credit card, right?
Correct.
Or a home address of somebody that's staying at the hotel, correct?
Right.
But the way you did it, when somebody asked to get a room next to somebody else, was different, wasn't it?
I don't understand the question.
Back in 2008, you told us that when somebody was requesting a room next to somebody else, the policy at the Nashville Marriott was lenient, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Is he asking her for a deposition testimony, or, because that has not been the testimony here today? So if he's impeaching her from her deposition...
I can do it this way. I'll withdraw. Turn to page 36 of your deposition to see if it refreshes your memory.
Your Honor, he still has not asked the question that calls for...
I understood and asked the question, did you testify to that? That's what you asked. Overrode the objection.
Thank you.
Restate it again.
Back in 2008, when you were there and you were a supervisor at the front desk, was the policy to be lenient when somebody came up to the desk and asked to be placed next to somebody else?
It just depended on the situation. If they were traveling together, then, and if they requested that at check-in, then we would typically do it.
Would you now turn to page 36 of your deposition?
Your Honor, may we approach?
objections arose.
So if I could ask you to read on page 36 of your deposition, lines 4 through 8. Does that refresh you that back when this happened in '08, that the policy was lenient when someone asked to be placed in a room next to someone else?
It does, as far as what I was referring to were our business customers that were in on a weekly basis. If we knew them and we knew they were traveling together and they checked in at different times, then we would place them side by side.
I would read from page 36 of the deposition, Your Honor, lines 3 through 8. At one point, it was lenient, as far as you know, doing everything that we could to accommodate the guests. Customer service, make sure the guests are happy. You know, keep them coming back. That was your testimony, correct?
Your Honor, that's not the entire line of testimony. I would ask your...
It's underwritten.
Your Honor, in light of my previous injection, I can't read the further part of the testimony.
Overruled.
The keep them coming back was about making that customer happy and selling them the room so that they would be a repeat customer, right?
Correct.
And the National Marriott told you to keep those customers happy so that they keep coming back, right?
Correct.
Let's talk for a moment about phones. The Nashville Marriott back then had phones in the guests' rooms, right?
Correct.
The rooms that you would assign people to, right?
Correct.
And those phones did not have a display on them that would tell people what number they're calling, right?
Correct.
Okay. Then another category of phones that the Nashville Marriott had at that time was house phones, right?
Correct.
House phones were phones that were placed in strategic places up and down the hotel, in the lobby area, maybe in the restaurant, maybe on each floor. House phones that allowed somebody to pick up the phone and try to reach somebody else, correct?
Yes.
And the way those phones worked was you pick up the phone and it immediately connects you with an operator, and then you ask to be connected with Sally Johnson, if I can just appropriate that name for Mr. Denard. Right?
Correct.
Okay. So those house phones also did not have an LCD screen on them that would tell the person calling from the house phone the room number of the person they called, right?
Correct.
And the reason that those house phones did not have that kind of display on them was to protect the privacy of the guest that was in the hotel room, correct?
Correct.
So if I were to go and pick up one of those house phones, and I were to say, I want to talk to Erin Andrews, the operator might connect me to Erin Andrews' room, but I won't be able to tell what her room number is, right?
Correct.
The only phones in the hotel that had an LCD display that would sometimes tell you the name and room number of the person you've been connected with were employee phones, right?
Correct.
They were phones located at the front desk. They were phones located on the counter behind the bar, and behind the area where the bartender would move back and forth dealing with customers, right?
Correct.
Wasn't sitting up on the bar, was it?
No.
If it was sitting up on the bar, then there would be a risk that a customer who's not a guest of the hotel, I won't even call it a customer yet, would pick up that phone and be able to see where somebody's room is, correct?
Correct.
Well, actually, not really, right? Let's unpack that, okay? The way even those phones worked was that if Sally Jones, up on the 5th floor, called to the phone with the LCD screen, then it would show the name and room number of Sally Jones, right?
From which phone? Or for which phone?
From one of the LCD employee phones.
Correct.
Okay, so if the hotel guest makes the call from his or her room down to y'all that are employees, the information would show up, right?
Correct.
But the reverse was not true, was it?
The reverse.
If you're at one of the LCD phones and you call to the operator at your service, AYS, and ask for somebody's room, then it would not display the room, right?
Correct.
So if somebody went, let's put this all together now. If somebody went to the house phone and picked it up and said, I want to talk to Sally Jones, they'd be connected to Sally Jones' room, but they wouldn't be able to tell what that room number is because there's no display, right?
Right.
If somehow some employee allowed that person to use a phone with the LCD on it, and that person picks up the phone and says, I want to talk to Sally Jones, the connection would be made, but the screen would not show it.
Correct.
So literally, if you're calling up to somebody's room from the lobby area, you wouldn't be able to see the person's room number, right?
Right.
And that's because of safety, correct?
Correct.
You don't want to take a chance that even if somebody's sitting at the bar and the bartender says, connect me with Sally Jones' room, you don't want to take the chance that the guy sitting at the bar sees Sally Jones' room number, right?
Right.
Because that's her home away from home, right?
Right.
Now, incidentally, a question that I'd like to follow up on here, if I can find it. You know what? I remember it well enough just to ask it.
Okay.
Were employees taught not to allow visitors or guests to use the phones with the LCD displays?
Repeat the question, please.
Were employees taught, back in that 2008 time frame, not to allow visitors or guests to use the phones with the LCD display?
I don't recall.
Do you remember any writing anywhere that said to the employees of the Nashville Marriott, here is the rule and the standard. Do not let people, even if they're guests of the hotel, use our LCD phones down here on the first or second floor? Anything in writing about that?
I don't remember.
There should have been, right?
I guess I don't have an opinion either way.
I mean, if a hotel employee allows a visitor or a guest to use the LCD phone, they might try to get the number, room number, correct?
Correct?
Oh, but the way you remember the phone worked was, even if they got the LCD phone and they pick it up and they call the operator at your service AYS and say, connect me with Sally Jones, it's not going to show the number anyway, the room number, right?
That was my understanding, yes.
So if somebody in this case is testifying that the way he found out about Erin Andrews' phone number was by using a house phone, that would have been just plain impossible, right?
Correct.
Okay. Next one. Did you all at the hotel there have incidents while you were there where you all had to call out the police?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall incidents of domestic violence for people who were staying in the hotel where you had to get the police involved?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Can you turn to page 118 of your definition? See it there?
Yes.
And can you look at the last line on 117 and the first three lines on 118 to see if it refreshes your memory? See it?
Yes.
Does that refresh your memory that back then there had been incidents of domestic violence at the hotel that required calling the police?
While I was there working at the desk or just in general?
In general.
Yes.
Now, remember Mr. Strachan?
Yes.
Is that how y'all pronounced it, Strachan?
Strachan.
Strachan,
Mhm.
okay. He was here yesterday, and he testified that the only incidents that he could recall was when some bank robber ran into the building and flushed some money down the toilet. Remember that?
Yes.
Do you know why he wouldn't have known about incidents of domestic violence going on at the National Marriott if you knew about it?
I'm not sure.
He did know about it, didn't he?
I don't know.
And the security company recommended more security, right?
Objection, foundation.
If she noted.
I'll ask you, do you know what recommendations were made by Mr. Mazaluskas of Cumberland Security?
I don't.
When you were there, the only security was one guard from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., right?
Correct.
Well, I found what I was looking for a minute ago, Your Honor. Did the Nashville Marriott back then maintain standards of care in relation to guest access to the LCD-style phones that show room numbers and guest names? Did they?
Not that I can recall.
Did the LCD phones require that an employee enter some kind of security code in order to use the phone?
A security code?
Yes.
To make a call?
In order to use the phone.
No.
So the only protection for the employee phones was to make sure that the employees monitored it and didn't allow guests to use them, correct?
Correct.
My question makes sense. That's okay. I'll sustain my own objection.
Okay.
I'll phrase it differently. You did know that the employees were not supposed to let guests or visitors to the hotel use the employee phones, right?
Did I know that?
Did you know that?
I'm not sure. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Did you know back then that employees were not supposed to allow guests or visitors to the hotel to use employee phones? Did you know that?
I didn't know. I didn't.
And you were the front desk supervisor, right?
Correct.
And did you ever tell your people at the front desk you're not supposed to allow guests or visitors to the hotel to use our employee LCD phones? Did you ever tell your people that?
No.
Were you ever told that by Mr. Strachan?
No, not that I recall.
Were you ever told that by any superior?
No.
Were you ever trained on that subject?
Not that I can remember.
Okay, if we can put up Exhibit 2, and if I can just run, I'm going to put it on the screen. Trial Exhibit 5. Are we looking here at a printout from the PMS system?
Yes.
All right. And so, this is what the person at the desk would see when they're looking at their PMS screen at some point in the process, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so we see that one has a creation date of September 2, right?
Yes.
And what that means is that typically 2 days before a date when guests will be arriving, what you all would do is you would pull all the reservations for 2 or 3 days later just to get an idea of what's coming up, correct?
Correct.
And especially when you have a big day coming up like that Vanderbilt, South Carolina game, and you have 60 people from ESPN coming in and all that activity going on, you want to look ahead and see what's coming up, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if we look at that, and we go over to the left-hand side, and we see there Michael Barrett, correct?
Yes.
And then below that, we see under special request, we see A1C1. Do you see that?
Yes.
So Michael Barrett, as of the creation date of September 2, had made a request for an adjoining or connecting room, right?
Correct.
And typically, when that kind of request is made, typically, down in the comment section below that, it would say who he wants to be connected or adjoined to, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, have you seen the Oscar document? You know what I'm talking about when I say Oscar?
Yes.
All right. So what I'd like to do is put up here for this trial exhibit 2. One second. Well, you know what I'll do? The ladies and gentlemen have seen it earlier, and rather than identifying the computer number, have you seen the one, the Oscar one, that says, guest request to room next to Erin Andrews? Have you seen that?
I believe I have.
Okay. In fact, within the last week or two, you've spent some time with the lawyers for the hotel and the management company, right?
Correct.
They spent some time, what, an hour and a half with you?
Or about that time. Mm-hmm.
And they went over various documents with you, correct?
Correct.
In fact, when you had your deposition taken, even though you were no longer with the Nashville Marriott, they represented you as your attorney, right?
I believe so.
And so when you met with them for an hour and a half to go over things, one of the things that they went over with you was that document I just quoted back to you, correct?
Yes.
From the Oscar system that says, guest request to room next to Erin Andrews. That's one of the documents they discussed with you, right?
There were a few, but yes.
They covered some others.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one of them, right?
Yes.
And you know that that document came from information that Takima Baker at the call center took from Mr. Barrett, right?
Like the foundation,
I'll withdraw
cause for
your
speculation.
I realize the problem. You don't know who it was, but you know that that was information that the call center received, correct?
Yes.
could put up Court's Exhibit 5, Trial Exhibit 5, and for my friend over here. So here we have something on September 4. You see that?
Yes.
That's the date that he actually checks in, correct?
Correct.
And down at the bottom of that, with regard to Michael Barrett, it says, do not move, right?
Yes.
Now what I'd like to do is back up then to page 221, which is Trial Exhibit 5. I think we were just looking, Your Honor, at Trial Exhibit 6. If I said it wrong, I apologize. So now let's enlarge that. Ladies and gentlemen who've seen these things. And so now we see this is on the PMS screen, the A1 and the C1, and it says do not move, right?
Correct.
Okay, so let's get clear on something. Under the comments section, if it previously had said on the PMS, guest request to room next to Erin Andrews, and they needed to put in do not move, they'd have to eliminate the first message because you can't take that many characters, right?
In a sense, yes. There's also a code of M4 for do not move, so you wouldn't have to take out that previous message.
But here's what I'm driving at. If it previously said A1, C1, and under that reference Erin Andrews in the comments, then when on the day of September 4, it went to M4, and you type in do not move, it would overwrite the Erin Andrews comment, right?
If it was there, yes, correct.
And just so we're clear, that M4 do not move, that one entry there doesn't get made by the call center, it's made by the Nashville Marriott.
Correct.
Right? Okay. So the A1C1, that goes in there at the call center. That this fellow is requesting this room next to Erin Andrews. That stuff would go in at the call center, but the M4, which means do not move, and that typewritten language, do not move, that goes in at the Nashville Marriott, right?
Correct.
And in fact, Mr. Barrett would not have even been assigned the room until September 4 when he gets there, right?
Incorrect.
You know what? Let me change that just a bit. He would not be assigned a room until check-in, correct?
Incorrect.
So would you look at page 70 of your deposition? You wouldn't be assigned a room until you either check in or if you are pre-blocked at the front desk or through at your service, right?
Correct.
So when it says do not move, that's something that occurs at the front desk where you were working, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And where it says A1C1, that means to you, with your experience, that there must have been a note below that about who he wanted to be put next to, right?
In most cases, yes.
No, there must have been, right?
No.
Okay, take a look at page 77 of your deposition. You see down at the bottom, starting at line 25
Yes.
through 78, line 4. In order to know who the A1 and C1 is about, they wouldn't know at the front desk unless there was a note under the comments specifying who he wanted to be adjoined or connected to, right?
Right, unless they were traveling together and checked in at the same time.
Okay. If Erin Andrews and Mr. Barrett walk up at the same time together and say, "Hi, we're friends, we like each other, and we would like to have an adjoining or connecting room," then you wouldn't need the note under comments as to who it was going to be with, right?
Correct.
But if just Mr. Barrett walks up and he says, "I want that adjoining or connecting room," you would have to say in the comment section who it's with, right?
Correct.
Now, let me back up 1 second more. If information comes in from the call center that says, on September 2, guest request to room next to Erin Andrews. Guest request. That's almost the same thing as if 2 days later he walks up to the counter and says, "I'm requesting to be put next to Erin Andrews," right?
Yes.
It's just coming through the computer from the call center, right?
Correct.
Do you know anybody at the National Marriott at any time in these events that picked up the phone and called Erin Andrews and said, "You know, there's a fellow, either by computer or in person or however it happened, that says he wants the room next to you." Do you know of anybody that called her to tell her that?
I don't know.
And if she hears from the National Marriott that there's some male who she doesn't know and has never heard of, who wants a room next to her, what do you think her reaction would be?
Shock, I suppose.
If it had been you, you would have wanted to know, right?
Correct.
So that you could take action to protect yourself from whoever this person is, right?
Right.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Verkeen.
Hi.
Brent Usry for the defendants. You were asked a lot of questions by Mr. Borlett regarding prior deposition testimony. When you gave your deposition over a year ago, did you have the complete picture of what had occurred at the hotel in September of 2008?
I did not.
Since that time, have you been able to review additional documentation that has given you a more complete picture of what occurred?
Yes.
And that additional documentation includes sworn deposition testimony, correct?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Kennard and Mr. Broilette, I'm going to get it. I swear I'm going to get it. Broilette. I keep thinking the two words and put them together. Let's start over there. Mr. Kennard and Mr. Broilette sent you a care package, correct?
A care package?
Your deposition?
They did.
Okay. In that care package, did they provide anything else other than your deposition?
No.
Did they provide you any sworn testimony from additional witnesses who were actually present when the events that occurred happened?
No.
You have your deposition in front of you.
I do.
So let's go through some of these citations that Mr. Broilette wanted you to look at. He referenced a handbook on page 50. Now, was the handbook that you were asked about on page 50 a training handbook?
No.
It was an employment handbook.
Correct.
It's probably the same type of handbook that you've gotten in every job you've held.
Correct.
And so if the question that's being asked about this handbook has to do with training, it's simply the wrong handbook, correct?
Correct.
Based on what you know now, did the comment, guest request room next to Miss Andrews, ever get to the Vanderbilt Marriott?
It did not.
And so if that comment never got there, and Mr. Barrett never mentioned Erin Andrews' name, the fact that he ended up in room 1049 as opposed to room 1051, next to 1051, had nothing to do with the comment that he told the Marriott International, correct?
Correct.
I want you to flip to page 69. Now, the question you were asked about starts on line 23 of page 69 and continued, and Mr. Broilette wanted you to stop at line 4. Now, the question that you were asked addressed if Mr. Tobin, I apologize, I don't know Tobin's last name off the top of my head.
Tobin Lanzetta, Your Honor, one of the lawyers who worked on the case on our side.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lanzetta had called to make a reservation how he would be assigned a room, correct?
Correct.
Now, in his hypothetical that he gave you, did he indicate whether he was a rewards member?
No.
Did he ask for a guaranteed room type?
No.
Did he ask for a concierge level floor?
No.
So basically, his entire hypothetical was, I just need a room.
Correct.
And if someone called and just needed a room, didn't care what type it was, didn't care what floor it was, there's no policy, procedure, or practice at the Vanderbilt Marriott back in 2008 that indicates he would have been pre-booked, correct?
Correct.
Now, what Mr. Broilette did not ask you to do is go past line 4 in your deposition, correct?
Correct.
And there are instances, and you testified in your deposition, in which the front desk and the sales department at the Vanderbilt Marriott would pre-block rooms, correct?
Correct.
And one of those very instances would be in the situation in which a guest had a reservation for a concierge level floor, correct?
Correct.
It would also occur if you had a rewards member coming in, correct?
Correct.
And the pre-blocking would be to ensure that that rewards member got the guaranteed room type, correct?
Correct.
And so when Mr. Broylette wanted you to read this, he didn't give you the whole picture, did he?
He did not.
Well, let's continue on. Your next is on page 77. And this is going to be the hypothetical that Mr. Lanzetta gave you in your deposition, and Mr. Broylette wanted you to talk about a connection for an adjoining room, and he actually tied it to Mr. Barrett in this case. And the question had to do with whether there was not a note under the comment section indicating to whom he would want to be connected. So you have an A1, you have a C1, but you don't have the name.
Right.
And am I correct that your testimony was that if you didn't know who they were to be connected to, you couldn't connect them?
Correct.
And so and that's where Mr. Broylette had you stop, correct?
Correct.
But your answer didn't stop there, did it?
It did not.
Objection, the answer stopped there, then there's more questions.
Did your explanation of how you would handle that situation stop there?
It did not.
Based on your deposition testimony and your knowledge and experience of having worked 5 years in the front desk as both an agent and a supervisor, what did you testify you would actually do in that situation if you had the hypothetical Mr. Barrett there? He had an A1, a C1, but there was no indication on his reservation to whom he was to be connected or adjoined.
If he didn't tell me, then I would just check him into his guaranteed room type.
And if you look at the bottom of 78, kind of towards the middle, Mr. Lanzetta asked you, well, what if he had asked? What if he had said, I want to be connected or adjoining to Erin Andrews' rooms? What would you do in that scenario? What did you testify in that instance?
That I would check her reservation and see if there was any connecting information as far as if she too wanted to be next to that person.
So if you had Susie Johnson, Susie Jones, I can't remember the name they keep bringing up, but Sally. I knew Your Honor would remember. Now, do you remember the last name? I think it's Johnson. Sally Johnson checks in, says, I would like to be next to Michael Barrett. You would check Michael Barrett's reservation, and if he had a note on his reservation that said, I want to be next to Sally Johnson, you would have independently verified that both parties have identical requests, correct?
Correct.
And having confirmed that both independent parties have corroborated their request, you would accommodate that request, correct?
Correct.
So your deposition continued. But what if there was no notation on Mrs. Andrews' room about an adjoining or connecting request back to Mr. Barrett? So you have one-way street, but not the corresponding two-way. What would you have done in that situation based on your testimony in your deposition?
If the person was already checked in, we would wait on verbal confirmation.
And that could include simply getting on the phone and calling Miss Andrews' room saying, I have a Mr. Barrett here who would like to be adjoining or connecting to you, correct?
Correct.
And that's how the front desk would have handled this situation back in September of 2008.
Correct.
And so when Mr. Broylette is having you review pieces of your deposition testimony, he is not giving you the complete picture. correct?
Correct.
He's not giving the jury the complete picture here today, correct?
Correct.
Is it your testimony here today, something that you want this jury to leave here today with, that you would put the hotel's profits over guest safety?
No.
And so if that's the appearance that counsel is trying to make based on your testimony, would that be accurate?
No.
Now, how long did you work with Larry Strachan?
I was there for 5 years, about 3.5, I believe, 3 or 3.5.
And during that period of time, was he your supervisor?
Yes.
And so would you say you had a close working relationship with him?
Yes.
And would you say that he was a good supervisor?
Yes.
Would you say he was an excellent supervisor?
Yes.
What would you say about his reputation for truthfulness?
Objection. No foundation. Problem.
Your Honor, they brought it up. They've attacked his...
Hello, Road.
I'll repeat my question. Based on your experience with him as your supervisor and the close working relationship you had with him, what is your opinion of his reputation as to truthfulness?
He's always been upfront with me, and I've never had any issues with him.
Now, Mr. Barrett asked you about Mr. Mazaluskas and Cumberland Security and about a recommendation for additional security. You remember those questions?
Yes.
Now, did Mr. Barrett also tell you didn't know about that recommendation first, correct? And so he asked you a question that you hadn't spoken to Mr. Mazaluskas, correct?
Correct.
And so you don't know what his deposition testimony was, correct?
Correct.
And so you wouldn't know that Mr. Mazaluskas indicated that he was not making a recommendation for security based on any criminal incident that had occurred, correct?
Correct.
You were asked a lot of questions about written policies. Now, there were standard operating procedures that were handed down from Marriott International during your time at the Vanderbilt Marriott, correct?
Correct.
And y'all, the hotel, front desk included, you personally were required to follow those policies.
Correct.
The hotel also came up with some LSOPs, some local standard operating procedures, correct?
Correct.
And you were required, personally, to follow those procedures.
Correct.
And you required your front desk agents that you supervise to follow those procedures, correct?
Correct.
Now, there was also verbal procedures and rules that you would provide to your front desk, correct?
Correct.
And those were things that you would specifically teach and reinforce to the employees that you supervise, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Strachan, as your supervisor, would give you verbal training and rules and policies that you had to follow, correct?
Correct.
And you were required to take what Mr. Strachan had provided to you and also to teach those in your agents, correct?
Correct.
And to supervise those agents and to call them out if they violated those verbal policies.
Correct.
Did the fact that something was a verbal policy as opposed to a written policy mean it didn't matter?
No.
Did it mean that you could just disregard it?
No.
And so the fact that something's not in writing, does that mean that in September of 2008 that there simply was no training whatsoever about that topic?
No.
And so if there's no written policy about guest privacy that you can put your hand on today, does that mean there was absolutely no training at that time about guest privacy?
No.
In fact, there was quite a bit of training about guest privacy, correct?
Correct.
Guest agents were told not to give out room numbers, correct?
Correct.
And there were means and operations that were implemented at the front desk to prevent that type of information from being disclosed, correct?
Correct.
If I were to check in a room, would an agent tell me what room I'm going to be in a verbal voice?
No.
Would they write it down on my slip, fold it over, and slide it to me?
Yes.
Were credit card numbers pasted up in the back in big font letters?
No.
Were those maintained and kept secret?
Yes.
Did y'all put up addresses, phone books full of every guest address, telephone numbers, email addresses?
No.
So the fact that there's not a written policy that you can put your hand on today as you sit before this jury, that doesn't mean there was no policies and procedures, no practices at the Vanderbilt Marriott, were there?
Right.
Now, as a front desk supervisor, did you conduct morning meetings with your agents or
Yes.
first shift meetings?
Yes.
And during those meetings, would you go over issues that may come up during the day, what guests you may have checking in, important events that may occur?
Yes.
Would you also go over any new policies or procedures that were being implemented?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's back up a little bit. The training that was provided to the front desk at the Vanderbilt Marriott, you went through that training, correct?
Yes.
And then once you became the supervisor, you were responsible for conducting that training with other agents, correct?
Correct.
And from my understanding, there were two aspects of the training. You had a computerized training and a hands-on training, correct?
Correct.
And the computer-based training was training that was provided by Marriott International, correct?
Correct.
Earlier, you were asked questions about a training module. Are you referring to the computer-based training?
Yes.
And so if a topic was covered, strike that. If a topic was not covered in a computer-based model, the module, the computer-based training, does that mean there was absolutely no training provided on that topic at all?
No.
Some things could be covered in the computer-based model. Some things could be covered in the hands-on training, correct?
Correct.
If Marriott International changed a policy, would it be your responsibility to review it, learn it, and then implement it in the hotel?
Yes.
Can you think of any standard operating procedure or Marriott International policy that you just didn't do it?
No.
If Marriott International came up with a new policy, opposed to revising one, they come up with a new policy prior to September of 2008. Would you do the same thing? You'd have to learn it and implement it and teach it to your agents?
Yes.
Were there any new policies that were mandated by Marriott International that you simply disregarded?
No.
So once the computer-based training was done, that's when the actual hands-on training would begin, correct?
Correct.
And for hands-on training, it's really closer to shadowing, correct?
Correct.
You would take a new agent and assign them to a more senior agent or possibly even yourself.
Correct.
And they would follow you around and see how it's done.
Correct.
And it would be an incremental responsibility increase. As they got better and better, they were given more and more responsibility, correct?
Correct.
And at some point, they were allowed to run their own shift, correct?
Correct.
And during this entire process, you as a supervisor are monitoring their progress, correct?
Correct.
And they don't proceed or progress or graduate to working their own schedule until you're satisfied that they are meeting Windsor standards and Marriott International standards, correct?
Correct.
And that's a practice and training method that you utilized throughout your time as a supervisor, correct?
Correct.
It's the training procedure that you went through and you had to graduate, correct?
Correct.
So if a guest came to the front desk and said, "Tell me the room number for Mr. Smith," was it the policy and practice at the front desk to just give them the room number?
No.
If a guest called in, I'm sorry, strike that. If an outside caller called in and said, "I want to speak to John," would he be transferred to the only John that you have in the hotel?
No.
If somebody called in and said, "I'd like to speak to the guest in 9:15," would they be transferred to 9:15?
No.
they would have to show, the caller would have to show a first name and a last name of a currently staying guest in order to be transferred to that room, correct?
Correct.
And that was something that was provided as a benefit to guests, correct?
Correct.
In your experience in the hotel industry, someone who's staying in a hotel will want to have connection to incoming calls, correct?
Correct.
If someone didn't want any incoming calls, they would come down the front desk and say, hold all calls.
Correct.
Do not disturb. Correct?
Yes.
You touched on this a little bit in your direct, that the front desk was responsible for checking in guests, correct?
Yes.
They would also check guests out to the extent they didn't use their express checkout.
Correct.
They would answer questions that guests may have.
Yes.
So in truth, the front desk was really, in most cases, the first point of contact for guests at the hotel.
Correct.
And that could be the last point of contact as well.
Yes.
Now, there's been some testimony about at your service, the operator.
Yes.
So when we refer to at your service or the hotel operator, we're kind of talking about the same thing, right?
Yes.
Now, the front desk agents would actually man the at your service.
Correct.
So if I was a front desk agent, the first 4 hours of my 8-hour shift I could spend at the front desk, correct?
Correct.
And the second 4 hours I could spend at your service answering calls.
Correct.
And the training that was provided at the front desk was the same training that was provided at your service, correct?
Correct.
And so the importance of training for guest privacy at the front desk applied equally to at your service and vice versa.
Correct.
And the individuals that went through at your service went through the same rigorous training in the module and the shadowing that regular front desk agents did, correct?
Yes.
You were shown some documents about some past history. Show you one of these. I believe this was trial exhibit number 5, and we got it crooked again. All right. Let's see. Do you recall seeing this document?
Yes.
Now, you were asked if this was a document that you could see on your PMS screen. Is this what it would look like if you were checking a guest in?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you see room 1049 under the room type? Or complex/room number 4?
Yes.
Is 1049 a non-smoking king?
It is not.
Is that a double queen?
Yes.
Now, do you see here at the bottom, just give me 1 second, the reservation number?
Yes.
Okay. And that reservation number is 1412, correct?
Correct.
And do you see the room rate of $109
Yes.
and the creation date of September 2nd, 2008?
Yes.
September 2nd, 2008 would have been the date that the PMS system pulled this reservation from Marcia, correct?
Correct.
And Marcia is Marriott's automated reservation and hospitality system or something along those lines.
Yes.
It works out to a nice M-A-R-S-C-H-A, but
Yes.
I can't remember it right now. So if we look at number 6, okay. So now, on number 6, this is also a folio for Mr. Barrett, correct?
Correct.
And on this, the rate is $130, correct?
Correct.
Now, on the night of September 4th, the concierge rate was $239, correct?
Yes.
And so 109 in number 5 and 130 in number 6 indicates that this was a split folio, correct?
Correct.
Why would a guest, such as Mr. Barrett or anyone else, want to split a folio?
Different reasons, using different credit cards, business purposes. It just depends on what they were trying to do.
And on the creation date, this is September 4th, the day he checked in, correct?
Correct.
And the reservation number is different. It's not 1412, it's 2122, correct?
Correct.
When you split this folio, let me back up. You would agree that number 5, created on the 2nd, was the original folio for the reservation for Mr. Barrett, correct?
Correct.
And then when it is split on his morning of check-in, the PMS system simply pulls the information that was contained on the original folio.
Correct.
So this do not move on line 18 on Exhibit 6, the subsequent split folio, that's not something that's added to the reservation.
No.
It's something that's merely pulled from the original reservation, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, and I hate to keep doing this, but let's just keep it. On number 6, 1049, the room type's correct. Correct?
Correct.
Now, in your deposition a year ago, Mr. Lanzetta showed you some PMS, or some Oscar documents, correct?
Yes.
You remember those?
Yes.
Prior to the day of your deposition, February 2nd, 2015, had you ever seen an Oscar document before?
Not that I can recall.
Had you ever been asked to interpret an Oscar document?
No.
Were you ever provided any training as to where Oscar pulls its information?
No.
Now, Oscar is a system that can be used to pull guest history information, correct?
Correct.
And it may pull information not only from the PMS system, but from Marriott International systems, correct?
I believe so.
But prior to February 2nd, 2015, you had no clue where that information came from, other than stuff you may be able to recognize would be contained in a PMS, correct?
Correct.
So you would have no knowledge as to what part of the Marriott information contained in Oscar would actually be communicated to the hotel, correct?
Correct.
And so if there was something contained therein that wasn't transmitted, you would have had no way of knowing that.
Right.
And in fact, as you sit here today, you'd have no way of knowing that.
Correct.
And so if that Oscar form contained numerous lines indicating PMS-error, you would have no clue what those mean.
No.
If it had a line that says PMS-error, a bunch of numbers, and says unable to process remarks, you would have no clue what that meant.
I don't.
You would have no clue what that error was.
Correct.
Between you, even though you had 5 years of experience working at the front desk, experience working with PMS, and a corporate representative of Marriott International, which of those two do you believe would have more knowledge about what was actually communicated from Marriott International to the hotel?
Marriott International.
And you had never heard of the pure system, correct?
Correct.
Oh, yeah, one second. Apologize for that. You were asked a lot of questions about the phones and how the LCD phones work. When did you leave your employment with the Vanderbilt Marriott?
September 2010.
So you haven't worked there in 5.5 years.
Right.
You haven't used one of those LCD phones in 5.5 years.
Correct.
So as you sit here today, do you know for sure what would and would not show up on an LCD phone?
I don't.
If someone that was working at the hotel currently still had one of these phones and used one of these phones in their daily business, do you think they would have a better idea of what does and does not show up on a screen when you call internally in the hotel?
Yes.
You were asked some questions about criminal incidents on or in the hotel, on its premises, or in the immediate vicinity. Are you aware of any significant criminal incidents that occurred during your time there?
Besides the bank robber now.
So when you're being asked about domestic issues that may have arisen in the hotel, you don't classify those as significant criminal incidents, do you?
Not that it isn't significant, I probably heard about it through, the manager on duty report. I wasn't there.
So you don't have any idea as to what the actual issue was?
Right.
You don't have any idea what the facts of those were?
Correct.
You have no clue whether the hotel was able to require or obtain their own security to intervene in those?
Correct.
And so if your deposition testimony that Mr. Brule did not have you finish indicated that in those situations, security, in addition to police, were called, you'd have no knowledge about that, correct?
Correct.
Did you feel that the Vanderbilt Hotel was unsafe?
No.
Did you feel it was in a bad area of town?
No.
During your time there, did the front desk area that you supervised have a good record for safety?
Yes.
Did you feel secure when you were at work?
Yes.
Were you proud of the safety record that the hotel had during your time?
Yes.
Show you what's been marked. Can't remember which exhibit it is. I'll say it's 2. This is the ESPN rooming contract for the group that was there in September of 2008. Do you recall having seen that document?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Did you have any input in assigning any of the rooms for the individuals with ESPN?
I don't believe so.
That would have been something that more than likely have been done by the sales department?
Correct.
Are you familiar with the floor layouts in the hotel?
Yes.
The document's been admitted into evidence. Do you see what I'm circling here?
Yes.
Could you please read the sentence that starts with "our"? If you can.
Our preference is for sleeping locations in areas away from heavy traffic, including vending, ice machines, elevators, and lounges.
Okay. This is a drawing of the 10th floor that plaintiff's counsel has done. Okay. And on this, you can see where the elevators are, correct?
Correct.
Could you mark, you can touch the screen and it draws on there. So can you mark where those elevators are? There you go. And which rooms are the farthest away from the elevators and the vending machines?
Right in this area.
You can go ahead and circle it. So that would include room 1051, correct?
Correct.
The very room that Miss Andrews was in.
Correct.
So the ESPN request was for rooms farthest away from the elevators and the vending machines, correct?
Correct.
And the room that Miss Andrews was assigned to was a room farthest away from elevators and vendors.
Yes.
Based on the documents you've reviewed, do you know when "Do Not Move" was put on Mr. Barrett's folio?
I do not.
As you sit here today, do you know why it was put on there?
I do not.
You weren't involved in checking in, Mr. Barrett, were you?
I wasn't.
Another front desk agent did so, correct?
Correct.
Excuse me one second. I think that's all I have. Thank you.